just start by talking a little bit about what got you to where you are today? What were the career steps involved to becoming an executive editor?
So thank you guys for having me, first of all, and for the opportunity to talk about Nightbitch, one of my favorite books I've ever published. But it took me a long time to get to the place where I was publishing books that I myself had acquired. So that started in college. I was a creative writing major with a focus on, well, sorry, I was actually an English major with a focus in creative writing, and discovered very quickly that I wasn't going to write if I wasn't forced to. Um, so I was kind of thinking about what book adjacent jobs I could have, because reading was still definitely something I felt passionate about. And I ended up using kind of the only connection to publishing that I had, which was my high school English teacher's daughter. And I had an internship with her when I was in college, and she happened to work in foreign rights department of a publisher. And so ultimately, through that internship, I ended up getting hooked up with my first publishing job, which was as a scout at Bettina Strava Literary Scouting. And so scouting is kind of like a shadow industry in publishing. Not a lot of people, even who have been in publishing for a long time, fully understand what scouts are. The short version is that um, they're employed by international publishers, say a German publisher, a French publisher, to scout the American market for them and filter and feed them books that they will want to buy translation rights to. So really somebody who is constantly monitoring, taking in and digesting everything in the American market. Um, and I got that as my first job because as much as I wanted to be an editorial immediately, that's what I felt like workshopping gave me. The workshopping I had done in college gave me the experience to do kind of, I applied like everybody does to the black hole abysses, and nobody ever got back to me. Even with my internship under my belt, I just never heard back on a single editorial job. So this was my, from foreign rights, I actually had having that internship in foreign rights, I had a slight more of a way into scouting than most. Um, and so that's why that ended up being my first job. And yeah, I did that for 2 years and it was an incredible experience. I read everything on the market. I met a lot of people in international publishing. I met a lot of people in American publishing who I was supposed to be kind of, keeping track of what they were up to. And then after 2 years of that, I moved over to editorial at Doubleday as an editorial assistant. And that was a much easier move, even though for me it was lateral. It was just, I knew so many people. It was much easier to get my application in front of the right people, to know about the job the second it posted, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, and so I did editorial. I was an editorial assistant. Could be 3 years, I want to say. I was initially hired under two people who had very different lists. One who did almost strictly nonfiction, pop culture. His name was Yaniv Soha. Another person named Melissa Danasco who did kind of commercial upmarket fiction and very hardcore science nonfiction. So really wide spectrum. Uh, and then eventually Melissa ended up kind of surprising everybody by moving away from New York, which is now not necessarily such a death sentence to your job in publishing, but at the time was an absolutely no-go. And so the department kind of shuffled, and I was able to get that both like room to grow there that would not have been there otherwise, and also kind of leg up by inheriting a bunch of her projects and stuff. And then I slowly made my way up under the publisher mostly. I became his assistant editor, and then kind of moved up from there at Doubleday. And then just 2 years ago, I moved over to Avid Reader. And that was really just like to kind of spread my wings and do my own thing on a much newer list that was like looking for expansion.
It sounds like you had an idiosyncratic pathway into the industry. Has that been true for your peers as well? Could you maybe compare your path to other editors in your position?
Yeah, I think a lot of people I know who are in editorial initially struggled to get into editorial. I just think kind of almost everybody struggles to get into editorial. And just because there's such a huge number of people applying. So there's definitely, I have a lot of peers who I think did other, got their foot in other ways first, marketing, publicity, agenting assistant, and ended up kind of taking lateral moves to get to the place where they wanted to be. Um, I think the place where my path like veers a little bit is that I stayed at the same place and was able to move up. Um, like through all of the editorial ranks basically. Um, and that really was what I think is in one way or another, the ingredients to success of anybody in like a probably small creative industry that inevitably hits these kind of like bottlenecks at a certain point. Which is, you have to work really hard. People have to be a fan of your work, but at the same time, lightning has to strike in that a spot opens up where there was not a spot before, whether that's because somebody leaves or, gets reshuffled out. Somebody has to leave for some reason. And these are not jobs that people leave very often. Um, so, you know, Melissa was at the time the only woman doing fiction on the list. It just so happened like we had other women editors, but they were doing different kinds of nonfiction. And so it just opened up a really big hole for somebody to step into. And my boss, I think his priorities were just elsewhere at the time, and he did not rehire to fill that hole for like 2 years. So I was kind of able to build something in the place and then make the argument that I should be able to fill that hole myself. I think most people, at least at a certain point in there, maybe assistant, associate, end up having to move to a different imprint in order to get promoted. And that is like an extremely standard, commonly known thing within publishing that a lot of times you're moving to move up.
And for young people interested in editing as a career, how would they proceed?
You don't have to do like, the hyper expensive, like 3-week publishing certificate programs in New York. I think there's so many people now at this point who have done them, and basically what they're paying for is connections. And you can, I don't know, and it doesn't always work, I guess is what I mean. And so I don't think it's worth the money. But I also think those people who do those programs and everybody else often ends up doing something first if they want to do editorial. So be open to like a variety of entry points into the business and seeing it as a way that you're kind of like gaining industry knowledge and also making yourself ultimately more attractive to the job that you ultimately want. But also you might like the other job, you just don't know anything about it yet, because the thing that most people think about is editorial. Unless there is an office set up or kind of some kind of satellite site where you are, I do think that being in person is really important for the job, unless your whole department is offsite or remote for whatever reason, which is pretty unlikely, at least right now. So I would prioritize, if you think you're somebody who wants to kind of get in the game and work your way up, that probably what that's going to have to look like sooner rather than later is for you to be in New York and be at the office and have FaceTime with a lot of the people that you're working with, just to form those relationships, because it really is a relationship business that's hard to teach over